Infidelity isn't something you plan for. It's not written into your 5-year goals or pinned to a vision board. It's a slow unraveling, a misstep here, a hesitation there. And before you know it, you're tangled in something you can't control, drowning in the weight of it all. When I started working for Sinclair Associates, I wasn't looking for excitement. My husband, Rob, and I had been married for 8 years, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, it was steady. Dependable. If anything, my life felt too predictable. But predictability, as it turns out, can be dangerous. My boss, Mark Sinclair, was the kind of man who thrived in chaos. Charismatic, sharp, and endlessly ambitious, he seemed to operate on a different frequency from the rest of us. Meetings with him felt like stepping into a high-speed train, invigorating and slightly terrifying. It started innocently enough. Late nights at the office. Shared jokes over takeout. A glance that lingered a second too long. And then, one night, when we were working on a high-stakes client presentation, he kissed me. I wish I could say I pulled away, that I told him I was married and walked out of his office with my head held high. But I didn't. I kissed him back. And that kiss turned into something far more complicated, something I couldn't untangle myself from, no matter how hard I tried. For 3 months, we carried on our affair in secret. We were careful, almost obsessively so. No late-night texts, no public rendezvous. Everything happened behind the closed doors of his office or during business trips that conveniently coincided with client meetings. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a fling. But deep down, I knew better. Mark made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And that terrified me. The first crack in our perfect facade came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Rob was out of town for work, and I was at the office, ostensibly catching up on paperwork. Mark and I were in his office, laughing over a shared bottle of wine, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his smile faltering. "I need to take this," he said, standing up. "Give me a minute." I nodded, trying to appear casual as he stepped into the hallway. But curiosity got the better of me. His phone was still on the desk, the screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message. From someone named Carla. "We need to talk. Call me ASAP." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Mark had never mentioned anyone named Carla. And the urgency of the message made my skin crawl. When Mark returned, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He seemed distracted, his usual charm dimmed by whatever had just happened. "Everything okay?" I asked, forcing a smile. He nodded quickly. "Yeah, just a work thing. Nothing to worry about." But it was clear he was lying. And as I drove home that night, the weight of it settled heavily on my chest. I had no right to be jealous, after all, I was the one sneaking around behind my husband's back. But the idea that Mark might be hiding something from me was unsettling. A week later, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do, I snooped. Mark had left his laptop open in the conference room after a meeting, and while the rest of the team filed out, I lingered. It didn't take long to find something. An email chain, buried in his sent folder, with a subject line that stopped me in my tracks: Non-disclosure agreement, Carla Reynolds. My hands shook as I clicked it open. The emails were formal, filled with legal jargon I didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear, Mark was trying to keep Carla quiet about something. Something big. That night, I confronted Mark. We were alone in his office, the tension between us palpable. "Who's Carla?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Mark's expression darkened. "Where did you hear that name?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "I saw the emails, Mark." "What's going on?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." "That's not an answer," I said, my voice rising. You're hiding something, and I deserve to know what it is. Mark hesitated, then finally spoke. Carla was my assistant a few years ago. She filed a complaint against me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. A complaint? For what? Mark looked away, his jaw tight. She accused me of harassment. It wasn't true, I swear it wasn't true. But the company settled to avoid bad press. I stared at him, my mind racing. Why is she contacting you now? She's trying to renegotiate the terms of the settlement, Mark said. She wants more money. I wanted to believe him, but something about his story didn't sit right. And as the days went on, my doubts only grew. Mark became increasingly distant, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that set me on edge. One evening, after another tense conversation, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Mark wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. That's when I found the photo. It was buried in a folder on Mark's laptop, hidden among client presentations and spreadsheets. A grainy, black and white photo of a woman, Carla, I assumed, standing outside a coffee shop. She was looking over her shoulder, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. And in the background, barely visible, was Mark. Watching her. The photo sent a chill down my spine. Mark had told me Carla was trying to extort him, that she was the one causing trouble. But this photo told a different story. One where Mark wasn't just a victim, but maybe something far worse. I closed the laptop and sat back, my heart pounding. I had no idea what I'd gotten myself into, but one thing was clear, Mark was hiding more than I'd ever imagined. And I was about to find out just how dangerous his secrets could be. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of Carla, glancing over her shoulder with Mark looming in the background, was burned into my mind. My affair with him suddenly felt less like an escape and more like a trap I'd willingly walked into. The next day, I decided to confront him about the photo. I arrived at work early, my heart pounding as I walked into his office. Mark was sitting at his desk, scrolling through his phone, but when he looked up and saw me, his expression darkened. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Who took that photo of Carla?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Mark's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I saw it on your laptop. The photo of Carla outside the coffee shop. Were you following her?" Mark stood, his demeanor shifting from defensive to dangerous. "You were snooping on my computer." "That's not the point," I said, refusing to back down. "The point is that you lied to me. You said Carla was trying to extort you, but now I'm starting to think there's more to the story." Mark leaned on his desk, his voice low and controlled. "You don't know what you're talking about, Caroline. Carla is a manipulator. She's been trying to ruin me for years. And what if she's not?" I countered. "What if she's telling the truth?" For a moment, Mark didn't say anything. Then, he straightened and gave me a cold smile. "You're in no position to question me. Remember who signs your paycheck." His words hit me like a slap. I realized, in that moment, how much power Mark held over me, not just because of the affair, but because of my job. I'd been so caught up in the thrill of it all that I hadn't considered the consequences. I left his office without another word, but my mind was racing. If Mark was lying about Carla, what else was he hiding? And how far would he go to protect his secrets? That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Carla showed up at my apartment unannounced, her eyes darting nervously as she stepped inside. "I know about you and Mark," she said bluntly, crossing her arms. "And if you're smart, you'll get out while you still can." I stared at her, stunned. "How do you know about us?" She gave a bitter laugh. "You're not as subtle as you think. I've seen the way he looks at you. And I've been through this before. What do you mean? I asked, my stomach twisting. Carla sighed, her expression softening. Mark has a pattern. He gets involved with women at work, strings them along, and then throws them under the bus when things go south. He did it to me, and he'll do it to you. Before I could respond, Carla pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and handed it to me. Read this, she said. It's the letter I sent to HR before everything went downhill. Maybe it'll help you understand. After she left, I sat on the couch and unfolded the letter. My hands shook as I read it. To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally report inappropriate behavior by Mark Sinclair. Over the past year, he has repeatedly made unwanted advances toward me, creating a hostile work environment. I have attached supporting documentation and am requesting an immediate investigation into his conduct. The letter was dated 2 years ago, long before I started working at Sinclair Associates. And while it didn't prove anything outright, it painted a picture of a man very different from the one I thought I knew. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I stayed late at the office, waiting until everyone else had gone home, and then logged into the company's internal server. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find something. That's when I stumbled across the file. It was labeled HR_confidential, and buried deep in a folder marked Archives. My hands trembled as I opened it. The file contained a series of emails between Mark and the company's HR department. In them, he aggressively denied Carla's allegations and threatened legal action if they pursued an investigation. But what caught my attention was an email from the HR director to Mark. We've received multiple complaints about your conduct, Mark. This is your final warning. Any further incidents will result in termination. I barely had time to process the emails before I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart leapt into my throat as I quickly closed the file and shut down the computer. Working late? Mark's voice came from behind me, smooth and calm. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed. I could say the same to you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark smirked. You're not very good at covering your tracks, Caroline. I know you've been snooping. My blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, he said, stepping closer. But let me give you a piece of advice, curiosity can be dangerous. You wouldn't want to find yourself on the wrong side of this, would you? I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the secrets, the mounting tension, it was all too much. That night, I went home and told Rob everything. About the affair, about Mark, about Carla's warning. At first, he was furious. He yelled, he swore, he slammed his fist on the counter. But then, as I told him about the emails and the photo, his anger turned to something else, concern. You're in over your head, he said, his voice softening. Mark isn't just some jerk. He's dangerous. I know, I said, tears streaming down my face. But I don't know what to do. Rob sighed, running a hand through his hair. We're going to figure this out. Together. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Mark's office empty. His desk was cleared out, and his nameplate had been removed. What happened to Mark? I asked one of my co-workers, trying to hide my panic. He resigned, she said. Effective immediately. HR sent out an email this morning. I felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. When I returned to my desk, I found an envelope waiting for me. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words scrawled across it. Nice try. Mark's abrupt resignation should have been a relief, but the note he left me changed everything. Nice try. 2 words, written in his familiar scrawl, sending a chill down my spine. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling, as the realization sank in. Mark wasn't just stepping away from the company, he was trying to remind me he wasn't going anywhere. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head. Rob's support helped, but I could see the strain my confession had placed on him. We weren't just dealing with the fallout of my affair, we were confronting something much darker. The next morning, I called Carla. She sounded wary but agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. When she arrived, she looked exhausted but determined. "What now?" she asked, sitting across from me. "Mark's gone," I said. "He resigned yesterday. But he left me a note." Carla's expression darkened. "What did it say?" I slid the paper across the table. She read it, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is how he works," she said. "He makes you feel like you can't escape him, even when he's not around." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carla hesitated, then pulled a small recorder out of her bag and set it on the table. "This is what I did." Carla explained that during her time at Sinclair Associates, she had started recording her interactions with Mark. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "But I needed something to prove what he was doing." She handed me the recorder, her expression serious. "There's a lot on here, more than just my story. Mark wasn't just a bad boss. He was doing things that could take the whole company down." My stomach churned as I held the recorder in my hands. "What do you mean?" "You'll hear for yourself," Carla said. "But be careful. Mark has friends in high places." That night, Rob and I sat in the living room, listening to Carla's recordings. At first, they were exactly what I expected, Mark making inappropriate comments, belittling Carla, and threatening her career. But as the tape progressed, a more sinister picture began to emerge. In one recording, Mark was on the phone with someone, discussing a private account and a series of transactions. The conversation was vague, but the implication was clear: Mark was involved in something illegal. "I don't care how it looks," Mark said in the recording. "As long as the money keeps flowing, no one will ask questions." Rob paused the tape, his brow furrowed. "What is this?" "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But it sounds like embezzlement." The next day, Rob and I took the recordings to a lawyer named Evelyn, who specialized in corporate law. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. "This is damning," she said when the tape ended. "If what's on here is true, Mark wasn't just harassing employees. He was committing fraud, and possibly laundering money." My stomach churned. "What happens now?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. "We can take this to the authorities, but you need to understand what that means. Mark won't go down without a fight, and if he knows you're involved," she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. "I don't care," I said, my voice firm. "He needs to be held accountable." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn worked with the authorities to build a case against Mark. Carla's recordings were the centerpiece of the investigation, but the more they dug, the more they uncovered. Mark had been funneling money from Sinclair Associates into offshore accounts for years, using fake invoices and shell companies to cover his tracks. The scope of his crimes was staggering, and the company was desperate to distance itself from the scandal. HR sent out a company-wide email, urging employees to report any suspicious activity. The mood at the office was tense, everyone whispering about what Mark might have been up to. But the real shock came when we discovered who else was involved. One evening, Evelyn called me with an update. "We've uncovered something you need to know," she said. "Mark wasn't acting alone." "What do you mean?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "There's another name tied to the offshore accounts," Evelyn said. "Someone inside the company who was helping him." "Who?" I asked, dreading the answer. Evelyn hesitated. "Rob." The world tilted beneath me. "That's impossible," I said. "Rob wouldn't, he couldn't." "I'm sorry, Caroline," Evelyn said gently. "But his name is on the documents." That night, I confronted Rob, my heart pounding. He was sitting at the kitchen table, going over some paperwork, when I walked in. "We need to talk," I said, setting my phone on the table with the recordings queued up. He looked up, confused. "What's this about?" I told him everything, about the investigation, the recordings, and the documents Evelyn had found. Rob's face went pale as I spoke, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Caroline, I swear I didn't know," he said. "Mark asked me to sign off on some invoices a while back, but I thought they were legitimate. I never looked into it." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "You knew Mark was trouble." "I didn't want to drag you into it," Rob said, his voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it on my own." As much as I wanted to believe Rob, a seed of doubt had been planted. Mark was gone, but his web of lies had ensnared everyone around him, including the man I had vowed to trust. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number: "You're in deeper than you think. Walk away before it's too late." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Whoever had sent the message wasn't just warning me, they were watching. The text from the unknown number haunted me all day. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, my every move scrutinized. Who had sent it? Mark? One of his accomplices? Or was it someone else entirely? The possibilities churned in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. When I showed the message to Rob, his reaction was immediate and intense. "You need to stop digging," he said, his tone sharp. "This is getting dangerous." I narrowed my eyes. "You think I should just let it go? After everything Mark's done?" Rob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, of course not. But we need to be careful. Whoever sent that text isn't bluffing." Over the next few days, the tension in our lives reached a boiling point. Rob and I argued constantly, the stress of the situation driving a wedge between us. At work, whispers of Mark's crimes circulated like wildfire, but no one dared to speak openly about it. One afternoon, as I was walking to my car, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and the engine idled as if the driver was waiting for something, or someone. My heart raced as I climbed into my car and drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. The SUV didn't follow, but the encounter left me shaken. That evening, Carla called me. "I've been hearing things," she said, her voice low and urgent. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Rumors," she replied. "That Mark had more people on his side than we realized. If that's true, you need to watch your back." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. "What do you mean, more people? Who else could be involved?" Carla hesitated. "I don't know for sure, but I've been digging into the company's financials. There are discrepancies, ones that go back years. Mark might have been the face of the operation, but someone else was pulling the strings." Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to Evelyn the next morning. "Carla thinks there's someone else behind this," I told her. "Someone higher up?" Evelyn frowned. "It's possible. The offshore accounts are more extensive than we initially thought. Mark couldn't have set this up alone." "Then who?" I pressed. "Who would have that kind of access?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "There's only one person who fits the profile." I held my breath as she said the name, Michael Grant. Michael was the CEO of Sinclair Associates, a powerful, respected figure who had built the company from the ground up. The idea that he might be involved in Mark's schemes was almost too much to process. That afternoon, I received an email from an anonymous account. The subject line read, "We need to talk." The message was short and to the point: "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Main at 10 p.m. Come alone." My first instinct was to delete it, but something about the tone caught my attention. If this person had information about Mark, or Michael, I couldn't afford to ignore it. That night, I told Rob I was going for a drive and headed to the address. The street was quiet, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I waited nervously until a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Carla. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Carla said, glancing around nervously. "You're the one who sent the email?" I asked, my voice laced with confusion. She nodded. "I found something you need to see." Carla handed me a folder, its contents thick with documents and photos. I opened it to find a series of financial records linking Michael Grant to the offshore accounts. But that wasn't the worst part. One of the photos showed Michael and Mark standing outside a private jet. Between them was another man, Rob. When I got home, I didn't wait for Rob to explain himself. I slammed the folder onto the kitchen table, my voice trembling with anger. "What is this?" Rob's eyes widened as he looked at the photo. "Where did you get that?" "That's not an answer," I snapped. "You said you didn't know what Mark was up to." "But this? This doesn't look like a coincidence." Rob ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because right now, it looks like you've been lying to me this whole time." Rob hesitated, then finally spoke. "I didn't want to tell you because I thought it would protect you. But yes, I worked with Mark and Michael on some deals. I didn't know they were illegal, not at first. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Rob had always been my anchor, the one person I could count on. But now, everything I thought I knew about him was in question. What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rob looked at me, his expression desperate. "We fix this. Together." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that he was telling me the truth. But the image of him standing beside Mark and Michael lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of how far he'd fallen. The next day, I received another text from the anonymous number, "You're getting too close. Back off, or you'll regret it." I showed the message to Evelyn, who insisted on reporting it to the authorities. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Mark might have resigned, but his influence was still there, lurking in the shadows. As I walked to my car that evening, I felt the familiar chill of being watched. And when I slid into the driver's seat, I found a single envelope waiting for me on the dashboard. Inside was a photograph of my family, Rob, me, and the kids, sitting in our living room. The message was clear: whoever was behind this wasn't just coming for me. They were coming for all of us. I sat frozen in my car, staring at the photograph of my family. The thought that someone had been watching us, invading the sanctity of our home, was like a knife to the chest. This wasn't just about me or Rob anymore, our kids were part of this nightmare now. When I finally got home, Rob was waiting in the living room. His face tensed the moment he saw me. "What's wrong?" I handed him the photograph without a word. His expression darkened as he looked at it, and he clenched his jaw. "This has gone too far." I nodded, my voice trembling. "We need to tell the police." "We can't," Rob said quickly. "Not yet." I frowned, my fear giving way to frustration. "Why not?" "Because if we go to the police without solid proof, whoever's behind this will know. And if they've already crossed the line by targeting our family," he trailed off, his meaning clear. The next morning, Rob and I sat down with Evelyn and showed her the photograph. She was livid. "This isn't just intimidation," she said, her voice firm. "This is a threat. You're being targeted because you're getting too close to the truth." "What do we do?" I asked, my hands trembling. Evelyn took a deep breath. "We need to find out who sent this. And we need to do it quietly. If we can connect this to Mark or Michael, it'll strengthen the case." Rob hesitated, then said, "I might know someone who can help." Rob's someone turned out to be a former coworker of his named Daniel, a cybersecurity expert with a penchant for working in the gray areas of legality. When we met him in a dimly lit cafe that evening, He looked like he hadn't slept in days, but his sharp eyes betrayed a mind that was always working. "You've got trouble," Daniel said after we explained the situation. "Whoever's behind this knows what they're doing. But if they've left a trail, I'll find it." Daniel's confidence was reassuring, but his warnings were not. "If you're going to push this, you need to be ready for blowback," he said. "People like this don't just roll over when they're cornered." True to his word, Daniel delivered results within a few days. He called us late one night, his voice crackling with excitement. "I traced the photo back to an email address," he said. "It's a dummy account, but the IP address it was sent from matches a location tied to Michael Grant." My stomach dropped. "So it's him?" "Not necessarily," Daniel said. "The location is at one of his properties, a corporate retreat in the mountains. It could have been anyone with access." Rob leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Then we go there. We find out who's behind this." The retreat was a sprawling estate hidden deep in the woods, its towering gates flanked by cameras and security guards. Evelyn pulled some strings to get us access under the guise of investigating Mark's financial records. It was risky, but we didn't have any other options. When we arrived, the air was thick with tension. The property was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made every rustle of leaves feel like a threat. Daniel had given us a lead, a specific office in the main building where the email might have been sent. As we crept through the halls, my heart pounded in my chest. Every corner felt like a potential ambush. When we finally reached the office, Rob used a spare key Daniel had procured to unlock the door. Inside, we found exactly what we were looking for, a computer terminal with logs that matched the email's IP address. As Rob worked to download the logs onto a flash drive, I noticed something odd. There was a framed photograph on the desk, one that didn't belong in Michael Grant's office. It was a photo of Mark. And standing next to him, smiling proudly, was Carla. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. Carla had warned me about Mark. She'd given me the recordings that exposed his crimes. But this photo suggested a different story, one where she wasn't just a victim but an accomplice. Rob glanced over and froze when he saw the picture. "What the hell is this?" Before I could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. My blood ran cold as I realized we weren't alone. "Take the flash drive," I hissed. "We have to go." We slipped out of the office just as two security guards entered the building. Ducking into a side corridor, we managed to avoid being seen, but my heart felt like it might beat out of my chest. Rob clutched the flash drive tightly as we made our way back to the car. As we drove away from the retreat, my mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why was Carla in that photo? Was she working with Mark all along? And if so, why had she helped me? The next day, I called Carla and asked her to meet me at a park. When she arrived, I didn't waste any time. "What were you doing in that photo with Mark?" I demanded, holding up a printout. Carla's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "Answer the question," I said, my voice cold. She hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't want to tell you this, but I used to work with Mark. Before everything went bad, we were partners, professionally, I mean. But when I found out what he was really doing, I tried to get out. That's when he turned on me." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because I knew you wouldn't trust me," Carla said. "But I'm telling you the truth now. I've been trying to make things right." Before I could respond, Carla's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening. "We're out of time." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They know," she said, standing up. "About the flash drive. About everything. You need to disappear, both of you. Now." Panic surged through me. "Carla, what's going on?" But before she could answer, a black SUV pulled up to the curb, its windows tinted. Carla turned to me, her expression grim. "Run." Carla's command to run echoed in my mind as the black SUV came to a stop at the curb. My feet felt like lead, my body paralyzed by fear. But Carla grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the park's walking trail. "Go," she hissed, her eyes darting back to the vehicle. I stumbled forward, my heart pounding as I broke into a sprint. Behind us, the car door opened, and heavy footsteps followed. The sound of my own breathing drowned out everything else as we weaved through the trails, Carla guiding me with a firm grip. We finally ducked behind a cluster of trees, crouching low as the footsteps grew louder. I held my breath, every nerve in my body on high alert. Carla pressed a finger to her lips, her face pale but determined. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps receded, and I let out a shaky breath. "What the hell is going on, Carla?" She glanced around, still tense. "They know about the flash drive," she said. "And they're not going to stop until they get it back." Once we were sure the coast was clear, Carla led me to a small diner on the edge of town. Over a cup of lukewarm coffee, she finally laid everything out. "I wasn't just Mark's assistant," she admitted, her voice low. "I helped him set up the offshore accounts. At first, I thought it was all above board, just a way to manage investments for the company. But then I realized what he was doing, funneling money, covering up fraud, and making sure none of it could be traced back to him." "Why didn't you leave sooner?" I asked. Carla looked down at her coffee cup, her expression haunted. "Because Mark had dirt on me. Enough to ruin my career, and my life. By the time I tried to get out, it was too late. That's when I went to HR, but they sided with him. I've been trying to expose him ever since." Her story made sense, but it didn't erase the doubt lingering in the back of my mind. "And Michael Grant? Was he involved?" Carla nodded. "He was the mastermind. Mark was just a puppet. Michael used him to handle the dirty work, but all of it leads back to him. With Carla's help, Rob and I devised a plan. The flash drive contained damning evidence, not just against Mark, but against Michael and others within Sinclair and Associates. If we could get it into the right hands, we could bring the entire operation crashing down. But we had to move carefully. Whoever was following us wouldn't hesitate to silence us if they thought we were a threat. Evelyn arranged a meeting with federal investigators, but it wasn't scheduled for another 2 days. In the meantime, Rob and I went into hiding, staying in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Carla joined us, determined to see the plan through. On the second night at the motel, I woke to the sound of hushed voices outside our room. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain, my heart sinking at what I saw. Carla was standing by the parking lot, talking to a man in a suit. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the tension between them was obvious. Then, the man handed her an envelope, and Carla nodded before walking back toward the room. I ducked out of sight just as she entered. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked casually, her tone too light. I forced a smile, but my mind was racing. Who was that man? And what was Carla hiding? The next morning, we drove to the federal building downtown for our meeting with the investigators. Carla rode in the back seat, unusually quiet. Rob kept glancing at me, his expression filled with unspoken questions. When we arrived, we were led to a conference room where 2 agents were waiting. Rob handed over the flash drive, and the agents plugged it into a laptop. As they reviewed the files, their faces grew increasingly grim. "This is serious," one of them said. "The scale of this operation is bigger than we anticipated." But before they could say more, the door burst open, and Michael Grant himself walked in, flanked by 2 lawyers. Michael's presence was like a cold wind sweeping through the room. He exuded confidence, his sharp suit and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the air. "You've made a grave mistake," he said, his voice smooth but menacing. "Hand over the drive, and I'll forget this ever happened." One of the agents stood, blocking his path. Mr. Grant, you're not supposed to be here. This is a federal investigation. Michael smirked. You think you're safe because you're in this building? You have no idea who you're dealing with. The room erupted into chaos as Michael's lawyers began arguing with the agents. In the commotion, I noticed Carla edging toward the door. My suspicions flared, and I followed her into the hallway. Where are you going, Carla? I demanded, blocking her path. Her face twisted in frustration. You don't understand. If we go through with this, Michael will destroy everything. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I snapped. You've been lying to me from the start. Carla hesitated, then sighed. Yes, I made mistakes. But I gave you the recordings. I helped you get the flash drive. I'm trying to fix this. Then why were you meeting with that man at the motel? I pressed. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. You saw that? Of course I did. Who was he? Carla hesitated, then finally said, someone who works for Michael. He threatened me, Caroline. I didn't have a choice. Before I could respond, the agents burst into the hallway, their faces grim. We've detained Michael Grant, one of them said. But this isn't over. His network runs deep, and there will be others who try to stop us. As they led Michael away in handcuffs, he shot me a chilling glare. This isn't the end, he said. You'll regret this. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the investigation rippled through Sinclair and Associates. The company's leadership crumbled as more arrests were made, and the firm eventually shut its doors. Carla disappeared, leaving behind only a brief note, I'm sorry. Rob and I began the slow process of rebuilding our lives. The affair had fractured our marriage, but we were determined to piece it back together. Trust would take time, but for the first time in months, we felt a glimmer of hope. Mark's influence, Michael's threats, Carla's secrets, they were all behind us now. But the scars they left behind would linger, a reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything.